It's time to take command with former NFL tight end Logan Paulsen and former Commanders beat reporter Craig Hoffman.
Wrapping up the Take Command podcast, I am Craig Hoffman. He is Logan Paulsen. Thanks again to James Smith Williams for joining us. If you're watching this final segment on YouTube, you missed the interview with James Smith Williams, so make sure you watch the full episode at youtube.com/@1067 The Fan. All right, Logan, we got a great idea for silly season. Someone who's a frequent listener to the pod tweeted in and was like, hey, since it's silly season time where we're just doing whatever we can think of to make these episodes interesting in the absence of, actual substantive news. What would happen in a tournament of teams from the time that we cover, right? So from the time that you're drafted to basically now, what's the best, Washington football team that has existed? And I think they started it in 2012. I don't think anyone's going to be better in the 2010, 2011 teams, not better than 12.
Right.
So let's just go through year by year, and they wanted to rank it. I want to figure out who's the best one. Like in a hypothetical tournament, they play each other. So I think we just use the bracket method. So bracket method, like basically if you're at a restaurant, you can't decide what you want to eat. You take the first option that you want. Say it's a chicken salad, and you put it next to the burger. It's like, do I want the chicken salad or the burger? I want the burger. Okay, the burger advances, and you just keep doing that down the menu, and eventually
you do that when you go eat.
No, but it's a way. It's a way to do it.
I see. I got you.
If you get in a real bind, it's like it's a way to find if you really want. So let's start off with the 2012 team, and that's probably going to stay unchallenged at least here for a couple years. But 2012 team, obviously, star of that team is Logan Paulsen. He's there.
I think we all could agree that. Yeah, really was the backbone of that team. Carried everybody. Robert Griffin was really just hanging on my coattails the whole time. Tough deal for him, but someone had to do it. So. Yeah.
I mean, good job for him. I'm just not going to get us in trouble. So Robert's rookie year, incredible, magical season. You got Alfred Morris rushing for 1,000 yards. You got real talent on the outside. Pierre Garçon.
Didn't he rush for like 1,600 that year? Was that the year?
Yeah, I mean, it was a monster year. I said 1,000 to be conservative, because I didn't know the actual number, but monster year. Trent's killing people on the offensive line. That whole offensive line is really good in general. You got London
Robert
Fletcher
rushed for like 800 yards. That team was really good. And so what I want to bring up is, like, from a record standpoint, from a scheme standpoint, that team's going to be really hard to beat. However, I was wondering, like, to get your thoughts on it, and listeners, if you guys want to leave comments, we'd love to hear them. Like, how does that offense translate now when, like, we're kind of in this positionless football where you get more DBs on the field, you get guys with more speed that can match up with that RPO? And I know Robert was fast, but, like, Devin White, for example, in Tampa Bay runs a 4.3. Like, these linebackers are a different breed of animal. Montez Sweat runs a 4.4. Like, how does that offense translate to this level? And I think that to me is a really interesting thought experiment, just because, like, back then, like, we were playing base defenses. We were playing teams that had never, like, it was so cutting edge at that time. Defenses had no idea what was going on. We were seeing a lot of cover 3. No one would blitz us. Everyone was scared to death to play out of a gap. It allowed us to play super fast and just be ballers. I mean, now that scheme has become more prevalent. Defenses have figured it out. Does that team have the same success now? And it's kind of one of those things, like, does a player from the past have the same success now? Right. But it's something I wanted to pose to you guys. Like, what's your thought on that?
Yeah, it's hard. Like, we do this in basketball all the time, and it's like, well, who's actually a better basketball player, like Stephen Curry or Magic Johnson or whatever? And it's like, well, if Magic Johnson came up in the modern times, he probably would have figured out how to shoot a 3-pointer. So just going like, well, Steph shoots threes. Now, Steph shoots threes, but it's a bad example because Steph's the best shooter ever on the history of the planet. But, like, he came up, that was his thing.
Game. Yeah.
Right. So it's a great question. I don't know how much we want to factor that in versus kind of their relative greatness within their, the context in which they existed.
Maybe that's another episode for silly season.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think that's really great. Like because I'm sure there's also other things that were advantageous in terms of the way they played versus, problems that could present to defenses now. But it is, worth pointing out that like as Kyle's offense has proliferated the league in some way or another, like this in many ways is the genesis of it. Like this,
Sure.
What Kyle has continued to build in all of his stops in various forms. He was very successful with Matt Ryan in Atlanta, who is not running zone read, but some of the concepts and some of the big picture type of things, the way he thinks about manipulating defenses really come into form in this 2012 team. So yeah, it's a really interesting question. I don't know if I even remotely answered it. But we can go as we go through. I think what could be fun for this exercise is to see like, okay, well, when has the league changed where, we think legitimately that it's a factor? So 2013, that's pretty easy. 2012 team beats the pants off of it because it's a very similar team, except for much worse. Talent-wise, Robert's hurt. And
he's also made that declaration that he doesn't want to run the ball anymore. Like that changed a lot for us. Absolutely.
Yeah. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 games to end the year in a row.
Yep. Yikes. Tough time of year, that one.
Last game that you guys won in regulation in 2013 was October 20th.
Was it
against the Bears?
Bears, yeah. Bears, San Diego. I don't even remember the other one. It was a tough year. Tough year.
You guys beat Oakland, you beat the Bears, you beat the Chargers. Chargers was in overtime. So
tough one.
Great.
Tough deal.
I
think they beat 14 easy too. I don't think it's even a contest.
Same kind of thing. You rotate through all three of the quarterbacks that year. Colt plays some. Kirk plays some. It's Jay's first year. Robert obviously plays some. And yeah, again, like you win a couple early, but ultimately you don't win a game. And you don't win a game in November for the second straight year. You win the second to last game against the Eagles to get to 4, but that's a 4-12 team. Then there's a fun one. Then there's 2015.
Yeah.
So this team starts off very up and down. You have the code red game, Tampa, win against Tampa, go into the bye week at 3-4. What's really funny, and honestly, I momentarily forgot about this, even though I covered this team. They lose to New England coming out of the bye, and you're 3-5. You beat New Orleans. You alternate wins and losses going into Chicago on December 13th. And then you win every game in December. You win 4 in a row before ultimately losing to Green Bay in the playoffs. This is Kirk throwing to probably the best wide receiver group that you've had in this time. Pierre's still excellent. You have obviously Deshaun. Jordan Reed is an absolute monster this season. Chris Thompson's very effective. There's just a lot of good football players. Jamison Crowder is a rookie. You had a good special teams that year. Andre Roberts took a kick or two back. I think 2015 versus 2012 is pretty interesting.
Yeah, I'd say that's the best offensive line they've had here in the last 20 years. That is like the closest it's been to the Hogs. Like I remember I was in Chicago at the time. We played them. And I remember watching them in warm-ups and watching the game from the sideline and just the level of protection, the physicality that group played with. And then the dynamic playmakers you had on the outside was next level. Like that's Bill Callahan before he's got everybody banged up, like everyone's kind of at the peak of their powers. They're all molding into something. And I really think the limiting factor there, A, is probably defense a little bit. And then B would be Kirk Cousins has not quite hit his stride yet. Yeah. And that was the thing that really limited that team. I thought there was enough stuff around him to elevate. And he played well. Yeah, I'm not saying he played poorly, but
second half of that season, he was money. There's an argument to be made that Russell Wilson was the only guy who was better in the last 8 games of that season.
But I think
until the playoffs, where he laid an absolute poop fest.
And like I love Kirk. Kirk's an awesome guy, but I think he was still growing into the player that he is today, and in that season, right? And the contract negotiations, all that stuff. And so I'm trying to remember the defensive side of the ball there, obviously Kerrigan's there.
So that was an interesting year because
Matt Ioannidis is there.
The biggest thing was the back 7 had a really interesting year. Breland was really good that year. So you had Bashad on one side. Will Blackman had come in and really helped solidify things. D'Angelo Hall was playing safety, which was a little bit hit or miss. You know, they were definitely hit or miss in the secondary, like mega hit or miss. But you also had guys, you know, Preston Smith was starting to come into his own a little bit up front. Kerrigan was really solid that year. And a guy who I would say made a huge difference for that team was Will Compton came in off the practice squad. And Comp kind of got everything organized, and they just were a better defense once he got in there at middle linebacker. And you know, his knowledge of how to organize everything, his communication definitely helped them in the back end of that year. So before Will Compton was a podcaster, he was a middle linebacker, and that and 16 were probably his best years in the league.
Yeah, underrated football player.
For sure.
You know, he's like just super smart. I remember talking to him about run fits one day over lunch and just being like, wow, like the level of detail you have and understanding of how everything fits in this defense and getting guys lined up deserves a lot of credit. If I was going to say, I would have to give the edge to 2012. I think so Robert was playing better. Alfred was like at the peak of his powers. Like that offensive line was perfect for that scheme. The playmakers on the outside were tough, gritty, like especially like if you look at the last half of 12 when they were really rolling before Robert got hurt. Like it's hard to match. Like they had such momentum. They were so skilled. Kyle was calling great games. And I just think when I'm comparing quarterbacks, I want Robert in 2012 as opposed to Kirk in 2015 to lead the team. And I think if they're going head to head, I don't think that defense has the speed to match up necessarily with that 2012 team offensively. And I think that 2012 defense is very underrated. They had a lot of good football players: Brian Arakpo, Ryan Kerrigan, Bowman, Barry Cofield was in there. Like Fletch was still balling. The back end was doing okay. Like it was a very, very, very solid group.
So what's interesting is there's an argument to be made that on paper the 2016 team is better.
Yeah.
Record-wise, they were not, in part because they tied a game, the London Bengals game. That is one that is still just impossible to I can't believe they tied that football game. Anyway, Kirk throws for nearly 5,000 yards in 2016. Deshaun and Pierre are both over 1,000. Deshaun, by the way, 1,000 yards, 1,005 to be exact, on 56 catches. He averaged 17.9 a reception that year. He played, by the way, in 15 of the 16 games. So it wasn't like he was hurt all the time. Crowder was still very good. He had 847. Jordan played in 12 games, so still pretty solid. But like Vernon had come in. He was a 500-yard receiver. You know, Chris Thompson's another 349 receiving. So they were slinging it all over the place. And there's an argument to be made that I think that was a better team offensively, at least in 2016. Defensively was a bit of an up and down, to say the least. You know, Mason had come in at that point, and Mason and Comp were, I think, pretty solid as middle linebackers. They both had over 100 tackles. You know, Breland, though, was not as effective as he was the year before because they bring in Josh Norman, who 16 might have been his best year in DC, but he wasn't obviously the guy that everyone thought they were getting. You know, Will had kind of shifted to safety at that point. Blackman talking about D'Angelo had made his way out. And there just wasn't a lot of depth on that team. And I'd still take 12, but I do think it's an interesting team because that to me is like the biggest underachieving team of the Gruden era was 16.
Yeah.
And by the way, it's the last year that Sean's here.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. I think, you know, one thing I forgot about 15 is like, how do you match up with Jordan Reed? You know, if you're defensively doing that, that'd be a tough matchup. But yeah, man, I don't know. That offense was cooking. That O-line was excellent. It'd be interesting. And you mentioned kind of underachieving. Like 2012 team, that team is an overachieving team. Bunch of overachievers, right? Guys kind of trying to make a name for himself. And for whatever reason, I bet on overachievers, I guess. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Teams that are going to reach hard, dig deep, and kind of grind it out. So I think that team might be more talented, the 16 team, especially offensively. But I think the thing that was really, really stood out to me was just like, having been a part of the 2012 team, like it was just a bunch of tough, hardworking guys, and they would squeak out wins when it, you know, kind of like they were way better. And I'm counting myself in this because I was on that team, way better than the sum of their parts.
Yeah.
way better. And I think, like, if I'm going to put a bet, I'm going to bet on that team.
I think the thing that also is missing between 12 and 16, the leadership of a guy like Fletch, that those 15 and 16 teams didn't really have that guy. And, something that was talked about, like as Kedrick made his way out, as Zoe wasn't brought back, like as London retired, like there was a void of leadership that I think was really necessary. And you had guys like Terrence Knighton who came in and underachieved and like were thought like, oh, is he going to be a leader? And it's like, no, that guy doesn't really have that tool in his toolbox, even though he's a vet. So there's a lot of that in 15, 16. And it was a young coaching staff too.
Because Mike did a great job of, like, I just think about everybody, like Josh Morgan, Pierre Garçon, guys those guys were leaders. Santana Moss still around, right?
You kind of got the sense being around that like Pierre was over it by 15, 16. He was like, I don't want to deal with this crap anymore.
Yeah. And so I just think like that leader, that's a really good insight there, Craig, because it's like that leadership element. It leads to that toughness. It leads to that competitive edge. Kedrick, Zoe, those guys are like, talk about intangibles off the charts. And the Reed Doughty's, I think he's on that team still. Like those teams are just laden with guys who are good leaders and guys that are just incredibly hard workers. And I think the team reflects that. And so I think, if there's one criticism of the roster construction in 15 and 16 is, like you said, you let some of those guys walk, and I understand they're in the kind of the twilight of their career, but you didn't do a good job replacing that leadership or empowering guys to step hold, and you end up with kind of a super talented roster that's going to be disappointing, I think, to a certain extent.
Needed some direction. You had a bunch of quiet leaders. You had Kerrigan, you had Trent. Those guys weren't going to step up. I mean, unless something went really sideways, weren't going to step up and like say stuff. They were just going to go about their work. And, you look at it and be like, wow, look at those guys work. But it was different than what Fletch and what Zoe and what Kedrick kind of brought to the table.
And to be fair, like, I love Jay. Like, Jay's my guy, and I think he's a brilliant offensive mind. But I think one of his limiting factors was he didn't have a strong enough hand, and he didn't have someone on the staff who was a super strong hand in terms of discipline. And so I think Mike is a player's coach, but he had guys on staff who like Jim Haslett was like, not going to let you mess around. Kyle wasn't going to let you mess around. And that kind of created a difficult environment again for leaders to blossom. And, again, I think Jay's a really smart dude. Like, I love hanging out with Jay, but I think if I was going to give Jay some feedback, I'd say, hey man, could have been a little bit tighter with the grip there at certain points of the
I think Jay said that in the years since, but doesn't help us now. All right, 2017, not as good as either 16 or 15. Sean had left at that point. Deshaun Pierre. That was supposed to be the Terrell Pryor, Josh Doxson coming out party, and it didn't last past training camp. Whoops. 2018, same kind of thing. Not really a lot to write home about. That's the Alex Smith year. Alex
to me, that's a big what if, because I think that team could have been managed effectively, but obviously he gets hurt and it's not the same deal,
Yeah. And by the way, talking about the leadership, that they bring in Adrian Peterson. He's definitely that. Alex was definitely that. And then when it went sideways because of Alex's injury, goodbye on that. 2019 is an epic disaster. Jay gets fired. 2020, they make the playoffs. So I guess we real quickly entertain this thought exercise. But they're not beating the 2012 team. Like, you got Alex playing, really just, I don't even know what to call it. Miracle football. He goes 5-1 as a starter. But he's not really pushing the ball down the field at all. You just don't really know how it's working. Gibson has a pretty solid year as a rookie. But I don't know. Do you remember off the top of your head the good skill players on that team?
I remember that team was kind of a little bit of a miracle, kind of under-talented, overachieved, got a little lucky at certain points of the year. That was the year the division was terrible, right? And they kind of
they win it at 7-9.
Yeah, and so I don't think there's really any contest. I think outside of 2005 or 2015, 2016, the only other team that I would even consider beating the 2012 team is this year. And let me give you a good argument as to why. And so I look at the defense right now, and I do not know how that offense functions against this defense. Like, they just have so many kind of guys who can play multiple spots in the back end, the speed on the edges, the physicality inside. And, I think the one weakness of this defense is the linebackers, and that's what Kyle is excellent at exploiting. But, Jamin's going into year 2. Cody Barton's kind of that hybrid safety. Khaleke Hudson's looking good in training camp. Really, the guy to me is Cam Curl, Quan Martin, those guys, and the role they're going to fill out. Percy Butler, though that safety nickel, Buffalo nickel kind of group of guys we always talk about. To me, that is a really, really special group of guys, and I don't know how you contend with that offensively. And the only question is, like, can this offense, or would this offense and Sam Howell be able to put up points? And with EB, like, I have a lot of confidence that they're going to be able to do something. And again, like, they're pretty talented. They're not quite as talented up front as that 2015 team in terms of offensive line. Skill position players, you're unmatched almost in that tenure, right? With Jahan and Terry and Curtis Samuel, right?
Like, I mean, it's probably the best since 16 with Deshaun, Pierre, and Jameson. Like, but even then, Thomas like the backs, the backs, I think. Well, I mean, you had Jordan and you had Vernon. I don't know, it's pretty close, but the backs I think are significantly better now.
But I'm saying, like, that's the thing, and so it's, to me, the only thing that's even a question is Sam, and can he produce? And I think with EB he can, and the O-line, and can they pass protect against that 2012 offensive line or defensive line? So,
God, that'd be fun.
That would be
Trent and those dudes versus all the pass rushers here.
Yeah.
Too bad we didn't think about asking James about this. Hey, James, do you want to go up against 2012 Trent Williams?
Yeah. I don't know if
Probably
anybody
not.
Does. Yeah. He was pretty good then. But yeah, so I think that would
now.
be, and I know that sounds crazy, like I'm being a homer, but I just look at the roster. And again, it's got to come together. It's still early, but in terms of talent, like, it's a pretty talented group right now.
Yeah, I agree. I think that the defensive point is great. You look at the speed they have. This defense could be really, really good. We'll see.
And it could be. It could
they got to put it together, but they could be really good. All right, that was fun. If you have any more silly season ideas, tweet me at Craig Hoffman. You can DM Logan on Instagram at Logan_Paulson82. I'm sure there's other ways to get in touch with us. Figure it out. Use the internet. Leave us a comment.
Leave a comment on the YouTube page. Yeah.
Definitely it's easier if you leave it on my YouTube page. But I do check the fan comments every once in a while as well. All right. For Logan, I'm Craig. Thanks for listening. Make sure that if you like this, hit the like button if you're watching on YouTube. Subscribe wherever you're watching or listening right now. And we will see you next week on Take Command. Thanks for watching this clip of Take Command. First, why don't you like it? It lets other people know that it was good, and then they should watch it too. And Logan, we have a new exclusive home for full episodes.
We do. 1067 The Fans YouTube page. Go check it out and please subscribe.
Yeah, do what Logan said.
Do it.
Very, very smart.